Thank you very much. My name is Dave Hill. I'm the Senior Director of the Worldwide Education Vertical inside of Hewlett-Packard. Good morning. Mr. Glassy, thank you very much for having us here this week. We are truly honored to be sponsors of this event, Innovation Africa itself. Good morning, ministers, delegates. I look forward to the next couple of days, spending time with you, hearing from you, and understanding what challenges that we can work together on itself. Today, I'd like to take you through HP's approach to education, and I'd like to also provide some real-world examples and case studies where we have developed and joined partners with municipalities, ministries, and country officials around the world. Before I jump into this, I want to briefly announce that on November 1st, HP will become the largest tech startup in the world. We will be a Fortune 50 company and very proud to take our innovation, our scale, and our collaboration to partner with public sector, municipalities, and district officials. As we move into our strategy, I think it's important to understand what informs our strategy. And in doing so, we ask ourselves several questions. We ask, what does her future look like? She will be operating in a global environment, in a very competitive environment, competing for jobs on a global basis, needing to be trained and skilled to accommodate and compete in that environment overall. In addition, she will also have to be capable of operating in a diverse, collaborative ecosystem. Moving forward, we have to ask, what skills will he need? Those critical thinking skills that allow you to curate data on what's right, what's wrong, and those opportunities to make distinguishing, informative decisions based upon that information. The process of innovation, how do we get from point A to point B? What design thinking skills are required to innovate? How do we collaborate with diverse global populations in order to achieve those common objectives? So these are very important skills that they will need to drive as we look forward. And of course, how do we have to address how do students learn? Whether it's auditory, kinesthetic, whether it's visual, no student is alike. And with technology today, we have the capability to accommodate all modalities within the learning environment itself. So as we move forward, I think it's really a startling statistic that 70% of the jobs that students entering school today don't exist yet. So how do we train them to become lifelong learners? And that's really what impassions and drives HP to partnering with the ministry officials such as yourselves to accommodate and develop these lifelong learners overall. Now let's take a step back a little bit, remove ourselves from the educational theory, if you will, and talk about the practicalities of how schools actually operate themselves. In doing so, we have to really understand, what are those key limitations, as well as opportunities to address the schools today, whether it's budgetary, and that's really at the top of everyone's list. How do we create sustainable models moving forward to ensure the educational ecosystems are successful not only today, but also tomorrow as well? Certainly the effective use of technology is very, very critical. It's more than just putting devices in the classroom, but ensuring that the current content, the curricula, the teacher training is there to enable effective use of technology overall. And of course, safety and security, whether it's the emergency management or whether it's the privacy and protection of student data itself. That's a core component to what schools and administrations face today. Pulling back, and as we look at how to create at a community or at a nation level, sustainable human capital development models moving forward, what issues do these communities face? Certainly it's around economic development. How do you align your educational ecosystems to advancing the economic of the nation state itself? How do we increase citizen participation with not only in the democratic process, but also in the education transformation overall? And then, of course, how do we create sustainable models moving forward at a community level as we look at developing the ecosystem, developing and training the teachers, and of course ensuring that you have a sustainable model to support on an ongoing basis. Now, these questions that we've articulated really take on the notion of how do we want to implement this in what we call the new style of IT. There are 4 megatrends in the IT industry today. And those folks from Intel, HP, and Microsoft, we live, breathe, and eat these trends on a daily basis. But it's our job to translate these into effective programs as we discuss what opportunities to help transform your educational ecosystems moving forward to tomorrow. Whether it's increasing the capability to collaborate with the cloud. We know that students today are traditionally nomadic in how they learn and collaborate. The role that big data plays and allows us to making decisions moving forward. And of course, the security element is essential in ensuring the right data privacy overall. We have to translate these into the curriculum in terms of what do we want to teach, the pedagogy in terms of how do we want to teach it, and of course, assessment, which is how do we know they've acquired the skills that they've learned. Now, this is a very big week here in New York with the UN rolling out their Sustainable Development Goals themselves. And as we look at the evolution of the role that the UN has played, and we work back in 2000 where we see the Millennium Development Goal that was number 2 around achieving equal access to learning itself. And as we looked at that, we saw that was a very noble endeavor. But as we saw, it's more than just putting devices in schools. It's more than just piling up devices for students. It's really needing to take a component of learning and learning quality that really drives what we're calling the post-2015 agenda, or the new Millennium Development Goals, or the Sustainable Development Goals, which is now number 4 on their list overall. And we see this era of learning that has been really driven by the policy sectors, whether it's the Learning Economic Task Force, whether it's UNESCO, whether it's the Economic World Forum, really supporting this concept of education quality. Now, from HP's perspective, we extend this one step further. How do we take this notion of access, this notion of quality, and of course, how do we align this to really delivering and knowing what outcomes we are investing in overall? And in doing so, this informs and drives our strategy around access to a universal education itself, regardless of economic, regardless of location, regardless of age. This cannot be achieved without true learning. True learning in terms of providing the content, the curricula, the teacher training necessary to provide that education quality overall. And of course, this notion then with access and learning, what role can we provide education, social, and learning outcomes overall within a nation economic status? So access and learning and outcomes really informs the way we engage, the way we provide our approach and our approach to business and education in 2015 here. And in doing so, we've built our solution model, which, as you see on the left, the notion of total access. Total access includes not only the infrastructure and the devices, but also the deployment and support necessary to accommodate that within these learning environments in a safe and secure fashion itself. And on the right, you have the true learning, which is the content and curriculum, which is your print to digital composition, certainly the teacher training and professional development, which is essential, integration into the learning management, student information systems, and of course, the right apps for learning overall. This access and learning is addressed with outcomes, and how do we measure those outcomes? Through an assessment process where we measure the learning, economic, and social indicators of the education transformation process. Now, this solution model is supported by what we consider the National Education Technology Assessment capability that HP provides and how we engage with nation states, and district, and school officials themselves. And in doing so, this assessment process, we have the National Education Technology Framework, which is a set of heuristics where we start a dialogue around what's the policy, what is the deployment and sustainability goals that we have to address in an effective education ecosystem itself. That's only the first step. The next step is what we consider the National Education Technology Readiness Assessment, where we not only embed it locally in education institutions to address the readiness from an infrastructure, from the various stakeholders, whether it's the local businesses, whether it's the administration or local school officials themselves, in addition to the teachers and students. We really build a grassroots core quantitative assessment on the readiness and the features necessary to develop a scalable education transformation model itself. At that point, we really begin to consider, and we move into the National Education Technology Analytics. How do we measure this? What role do we play in measuring the learning, economic, and social outcomes that are aligning to your specific goals in your specific institution? This, of course, cannot be done alone. We have developed this in conjunction with a world-class set of partners, which includes 3 NGOs, 4 universities, and several multilateral agencies themselves that you can see listed on the right side of the chart. So this is a capability that we look to really implement, and as what was a result of announcing this capability last year, I'd like to take you through several examples where we have actually developed education case studies from around the world and what learnings we have taken away from this model. In doing so, I'd like to start fairly close by, and as we think about the case study around effective public policy, and we start in Rwanda, where we really had to take a step back and assess what were the goals around developing a sustainable human capital development program itself. And in terms of how do we move from an agrarian economic to a services and software-based global competitive model overall. And what does it take from us to move from point A to point B itself? Now, this was a key element in terms of establishing the national strategy itself. And of course, as we embedded into the schools, and my colleagues back here, Pavlos and David, spent, I think, over a week in schools in Rwanda, building relationships, building the quantitative data necessary to provide and guide Rwanda the opportunity to really address, from a transparency and a nationalism perspective, how to transform their educational ecosystem overall. Moving forward, number 2, if you will, the addressing the national standard for education technology itself. Here's an example where we worked with the Republic of Ireland, and of course, back in 2009, they were under severe economic pressure itself, and policy alone could not drive education transformation in the country itself, given the economy. And therefore, through education standardization, they worked in a public-private partnership of which both Intel, HP, and Microsoft all participated in supporting how do you set standards from an ed tech perspective, and how do you integrate that into the educational ecosystem in developing an already human capital rich environment despite the economic environment that you are operating under. And this soft standardization approach was purely voluntary and set the standard in terms of for the bar for schools to participate. And it is important to note that this voluntary participation from schools achieves at this point over a 40% participation rate in really addressing what we call the digital schools of distinction. The number 3 case study that I'd like to articulate here is with regards to the Sultanate of Oman. And really it's a function of planning first is important. Planning first in terms of setting out what are we trying to achieve, what are those goals, and more importantly, how do we measure those goals when we know that we've achieved those thresholds. And in doing so, setting those clear objectives really helped set the stage on developing the nation's first one-to-one deployment through the net of findings that we jointly worked with Oman himself specifically. Number 4 then is the Republic of Ecuador, prioritizing teachers first. And in this environment, we really worked first in their education deployment with teachers to empower them to become very familiar with the education technology, the content and curriculum before it was rolled out in the schools and the students themselves. We provide instructional and workflow tools. We provided classroom management tools that allowed teachers to embrace the technology, to experiment, and to understand the role that the technology plays in the classrooms themselves. Using this with content across bilingual content and curriculum with both Spanish and English themselves, we really provided 140,000 teachers the opportunity to advance their understanding of EdTech before it was implemented directly into the classroom itself. And then number 5. Number 5 is a function of online learning. We've all heard the term MOOC, a massive open online course. And as we looked at the role of using that capability to scale learning at a nation level itself, we worked directly with OECD to build an online MOOC that was launched last January at the BET show with Andre Schleiger to really address the questions that ministers and delegates had with regards to the role that PISA plays in the effect in correlating that with their national growth. What is PISA? More importantly, what is not PISA? Are key questions that this MOOC addresses, which is free to all ministry officials, and allows them to use this mechanism to help understand and engage on how to set policy with regards to the role that PISA plays in establishing their educational ecosystem. And number 6. Number 6 here is I wanted to end on Baltimore, or the county of Baltimore in the United States. And this is a district where in the U.S. it has over 65% student population that qualifies for the free and reduced lunch. So it's a function of how well off the current environment is in Baltimore itself. And really Baltimore has taken a step forward in driving real innovative learning. They've taken a blended approach in including learning in and out of the classroom with and without the devices themselves, and they have started at grades 1 and grades 2 and how they've implemented their education technology program itself. And using this, they're using this information then to inform how they roll out EdTech for future grades in future schools around the district overall. So based upon what we've just talked through, we've addressed our education approach, which is access and learning and outcomes. We've taken you through a capability that HP has provided, and we work very closely with ministry officials to developing and enabling our national education technology assessment capability. And we provided just a few data points around the world where we have implemented this and where we continue to learn and engage on an ongoing basis to help transform the educational ecosystem itself. And so at this point in time, I believe I want to introduce Mr. Brian Gonzalez from Intel to come forward. He will carry you through his approach, how Intel's approach is to education, and then we'll come back up and take some questions here after that. And Brian, thank you very much. I think I see you more off in this continent than anywhere else overall, so nice to see you again. Yeah.